Hello and welcome to the Nufarm training series. Today's topic is greenhouse and nursery weed controls. Our agenda for today is going to consist of talking about weed control in nursery greenhouse settings, and we're going to start with sanitation. We're going to talk about post-emergent versus pre-emergent herbicides, non-selective versus selective herbicides, options or combinations to provide worker safety and save labor, as well as introducing you to a new product called Cheetah Pro. So let's start with sanitation. Weed management in nurseries, a big part of that is starting from the beginning, and your first step is sanitation. You want to start clean and stay clean. You need to ID the sources of the weed seed. For example, are they coming in on your liners that you're buying from other suppliers? Or are you using recycled pots and flats? Sometimes that plastic, the weed seed will adhere with the static electricity, will adhere to the plastic pot. And then once you add your soil and begin watering that crop in, those weed seeds will germinate and begin to take over. Or if you are mixing your own substrate, you may have piles of compost or various components to your media that you're mixing, and the weed seed are blowing in onto those piles, and then you're just mixing it up into your soil substrate. Most weed seed fall close to the weed, and while others can move long distances by shattering or traveling by wind. And many weeds grow quickly and can mature in 4 weeks. Hand weeding is an important part of the process of preventing the spread of weeds, and it's a better idea to have your team, when they're out there spacing the crop or they're pulling orders, if they see a weed, go ahead and pull that weed now and get it while it's young. It's easier to pull, there's less of a root system. Once those weeds start to mature and you get a bigger root system established, a lot of times you're just pulling the top off and not getting the entire weed pulled. And we've also found that it actually saves in expense and labor in the long run. Removing the weed once you've pulled it is important. A lot of the weeds will continue to mature, and that weed seed will then either shatter or be dispersed through the travel of wind or birds carrying that seed. And some of those seeds can shatter up to 12 feet, for example, oxalis. And crabgrass produces over 150,000 seeds per plant. So it's very important to get those pulled weeds out of the nursery. Weeding frequently versus when it's weedy is important. That frequent weeding helps in taking care of those weeds and actually results in 50 to 80% reduction in the amount of weeds that you'll have. It also provides up to 60% reduction in the time spent weeding and an average of 46% reduction in labor costs. The challenge is, if you let it go and don't weed frequently and you miss a cycle, it's very hard to catch up. But what about controlling weeds by using herbicides? One thing we want to make sure is that we use the right herbicide for the situation that we have at hand, and we'll talk about that. But using herbicides makes it easier to control small actively growing weeds. Most of the time, or ideally when you apply an herbicide, it's going to be when the weeds are smaller. Most are applied as directed sprays. You direct your non-selective sprays very carefully. Non-selective means that it's going to kill anything that it burns or burning thing that it gets on the foliage of. So you want to be careful around your desirables. Around desirables, you may want to consider wiping the product when practical, and instead of using a spray. And you want to be careful that there's not a wind drift, so you want to do it when it's not windy. Grass killers are selective herbicides. And they can be used over the top of most ornamentals because they're going to be focused on controlling annual and perennial grass type weeds only and not broadleaves. Overall, there are not a lot of post-emergent products available. And so a lot of people say, well, why don't we rotate products? Why don't we have a rotational program for ornamental weed control? A lot of times it's because we're limited on the active ingredients of post-emergence that are available, and therefore we have to look at also a broader program which would include pre-emergence. Pre-emergence are a necessity in controlling weeds, and especially I talked about earlier the labor situation. It helps tremendously in the use of your labor as well. So let's look at a partial list of post-emergent herbicides. We see on this slide down the left-hand side the mode of action of each of the products that are listed. We see the active ingredient, the brand name, whether it can be used over the top of many ornamentals or is recommended to use as a directed spray, and then the notes of what type of weeds it will control. So for example, your first product listed there is Envoy Plus. Envoy Plus is a selective herbicide that is used for grassy type weeds only. So it'll control a broad range of annual and perennial grass weeds. And it can be used over the top of many ornamentals. Sedge is a directed spray that is used for sedge control in established plantings. Certainty is a product that can be used for grass, broadleaf, and sedges, but yet be used over the top of many ornamentals. And then we've talked about glyphosate. So your example of Roundup there is a non-selective broad spectrum control that's used as a directed spray. And then glufosinate, and a good example being Cheetah Pro, is a directed non-selective herbicide. And then diquat and pelargonic acid are also non-selectives. So Razor Pro and Cheetah Pro, both being systemic types of non-selective sprays, are what we're going to focus on next. If we're going to talk about glyphosate, some of you may have a question in regards to the safety of the product. You've seen a lot of recent news stories or evening commercials based around Roundup. And I just want to show this visual to give you an idea of the toxicity level of various everyday products. And you'll see here that caffeine, aspirin, table salt, all these products are actually more toxic than the active ingredient in Roundup, which is glyphosate. So what is the difference between the two? The main difference is that glyphosate is extremely systemic. So with that, it has a lot of downward movement and gives us excellent control of weeds that perhaps have a large taproot. So the weakness or the concern in that would be the perceived toxicity, which we talked about earlier, and the fact that because glyphosate has been around for so long, there are some weeds that are becoming resistant to it. Now the glufosinate, it's also systemic, but not as systemic as glyphosate. So glufosinate is about 30% systemic activity, so it will move down, but if you have a weed that has a large taproot, you may need to make 2 applications. So it's also not quite as good as glyphosate on perennial grasses. And then the diquat and the pelargonic acid, they do not move in the plant. That's a burn down product only, and it doesn't have any systemic activity, so it doesn't move down into the root itself. So what is the first recommendation? Say we want to continue to use glyphosate. We've used it for years. We know it works, but we just want to use less of it. If you take glyphosate and add a pre-emergent to it, you're going to use the glyphosate to burn down or kill systemic what weeds are there and actively growing. The pre-emergent addition is going to give you months of control, so you don't have to come back in and spray with glyphosate, say, on a monthly basis, but you won't have to apply again, say, for 3 to 4 months or up to 8 months, depending on the microbial activity. So a few examples are SureGuard SC and Broadstar. The Broadstar and SureGuard SC, our active ingredient is flumi or flumioxazin, and it controls a broad range of grasses, broadleaf weeds, and what we've seen is when, for example, SureGuard SC is tank mixed with glyphosate, you actually get quicker results in burn down of the weeds that are there, as well as providing you that long residual. Broadstar is the granular formulation, and that is good for pre-emergent weed control in containers. So let's talk about SureGuard SC and Broadstar a little more. So we talked about SureGuard SC being a sprayable and Broadstar being a granule product, and the fact that they last long. The two products are mostly broken down by microbial activity and not so much with rain or sun. So that's what helps us, depending on the time of year that it's applied, to give us the longer residual. With the way that product works, it causes the cell walls to rupture when exposed to the sunlight. So that's how the product works. Key uses is commercial and residential landscape, container and field grown ornamentals, non-bearing fruit, nut, and vines, non-crop areas, gravel surfaces, on ground mats, a lot of use areas. Now the SureGuard SC, being the liquid formulation, does not require an EPA signal word. So that's good news for your workers that are applying. It shows the safety of the product. So there is no signal word. It has a full aquatic label. We've combined the label. We used to have a product called Clipper, and we've eliminated that product because we found that SureGuard SC will take care of our aquatic weeds just as well, and then give you one product on the shelf to take care of aquatic weeds as well as your greenhouse nursery weeds. So SureGuard SC blooms very quickly and mixes easily with less agitation required, and it stays in suspension for long periods of time. So here's a picture of some weeds under a tree before any treatment. Here we have tank mix SureGuard with glyphosate, and we're already seeing chlorosis or browning of the weeds that have been treated 4 days after treatment. What we found is SureGuard actually speeds up the performance of glyphosate. Glyphosate normally will take 4 to 14 days before we see results, and SureGuard speeds that process up. So the homeowner or the applicator starts to see results fairly quickly. SureGuard can also be used over the top of gravel, so whether it be in a commercial setting, such as shown here in the slide, or in a bed in the nursery that's coated with or covered with gravel, it can just be sprayed right over top of the gravel, and then you're going to get your long residual control. This shows, again, the long residual that you'll get with SureGuard. This photo was actually taken 9 months after application, and we're still seeing good weed control when used at the 12-ounce rate. These photos were taken 3 months after application. The first picture there shows applications of Surfland plus Gallery, and the lower picture shows an application of SureGuard. Now Surfland and Gallery are both good products, but they only have a 2 to 3 month residual. SureGuard has that longer residual, providing continual control. Let's talk about weed control in an enclosed structure such as a greenhouse. SureGuard SC can be used in a greenhouse, but only when the greenhouse is empty, so perhaps in between crop cycles or in the off-season. After you've made your application and the application is dried, you want to be sure to ventilate the structure and wait 24 to 48 hours. Then come back in and apply a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of water onto the treated surface before reintroducing any of your ornamental plants or desirables back into that structure. And then keep in mind when using the product or any herbicide not to apply when conditions are favorable for spray drift. Some of you may have heard of a product called Marengo. This slide shows the comparison of Marengo versus SureGuard SC. 30 days after application, we see that the SureGuard, when used alone, as well as the SureGuard when mixed with glyphosate, provides excellent control of hard-to-control weeds such as oxalis, henbit, cudweed, and bittercress. Where, on the other hand, you see that the Marengo, when used alone, and the Marengo, when added with the glyphosate, did not provide good control of bittercress and limited control also of cudweed. So it just gives us a visual that shows that SureGuard does provide a better control of some of those harder to control weeds. When planning to consider a tool beyond glyphosate, an excellent alternative is glufosinate. Glufosinate can also be tank mixed with your pre-emergent option, and glufosinate is going to give you post-emergent control of many broadleaf and grassy type weeds. Its weakness may be on some perennial grasses, and you may need to make 2 applications, or on a weed that has a large taproot, 2 applications may be necessary. On the positive, though, it's got little translocation, so it improves the safety of use around your desirables or around landscape beds and protecting your crops. It's going to limit the establishment of new weeds by adding that pre-emergent, and the combo spray is best used or applied in the spring and fall timings. So glufosinate, where can I find that? What is that product or that active ingredient found in? So I'm going to introduce you to Cheetah Pro. Cheetah Pro is Nufarm's new non-selective weed control. The active ingredient is glufosinate. It's in group class 10, and it has a caution signal word. So you may be familiar with Finale. Finale has a warning signal word. So our formulation is a lot safer to use for you and your workers. It is also twice the concentration. So we'll see over here on the active ingredient, we have 24.5% of active. So it's twice as concentrated as Finale. The product is rain fast in 4 hours, and your applications should be made from dawn to 2 hours before sunset. And again, be careful of that wind drift. Your PPE is long sleeve shirt and long pants, chemical resistant gloves, shoes and socks, and protective eyewear. Cheetah Pro provides post-emergent control of tough to control broadleaves and grassy type weeds, and does a better job on glyphosate resistant weeds. It's novel mode of action. It gives you a product to be used around ornamental trees, shrubs, potted plants, as well as in the as a landscape trim and in natural areas. It's fast, effective, non-selective control of grasses, sedge, broadleaf weeds. It's best alternative to glyphosate, offering a broad spectrum weed control. And directed sprays provide excellent weed control and ornamental safety, and tank mix compatible with other non-selective and pre-emergent residual herbicides. So it's a great tank mix partner. With the innovative formula that Cheetah Pro has, again, I'll recap. We've got the caution signal word, so safer for your technicians, twice the concentration, taking up a smaller inventory footprint in your chemical storage room or in your landscape truck. And it is a great alternative to glyphosate. So for those that are looking to do landscape jobs, you may be able to charge a premium for using an alternative. And you're going to see the wilting or result of the chlorosis much quicker. So 2 to 4 days, you're going to start seeing wilting with glufosinate, where glyphosate can take 4 to 14 days when used alone. You'll see here it controls a lot of different weeds. So a broad range of weeds are listed on the label. A lot of use sites are listed on the label. You can use trim and edge with glufosinate, so we get that nice clean line when trimming around certain desirables. You can use it for site preparation. Say you're going to put in a new nursery bed, or you're going to do a Christmas tree planting and you want to kill all the weeds that are there. This would be a good product to choose. And then the glufosinate can be used in a greenhouse setting. Again, when the weeds are young is the best time to control, but in that greenhouse, you want to make sure that it is empty, and then make sure you come back in and ventilate the area well before bringing your desirables back into the greenhouse. So say we want to do a more targeted approach and use selective herbicides to control specific types of weeds that may be present. Example being Envoy Plus. Envoy Plus delivers consistent post-emergent control of troublesome annual and perennial grasses with excellent plant safety profile. It can be applied over the top of a wide range of flowers and foliage plants as well as woody plants, and it has a caution signal word. Key use areas can be around conifer trees, flowers, ground covers, ornamental trees, and shrubs. Say we want to control sedges. Sedges being our main problem, we could use a selective weed control such as Sedge. Sedge is a selective herbicide that provides selective control of sedges in turf and around woody ornamentals in landscape areas. It's excellent control of yellow and purple nut sedge and horsetail, as well as giving us suppression of kalinga. It's easy to use water-soluble formulation, and it's rain fast in 4 hours after spraying. Another choice would be Certainty herbicide. Certainty herbicide is a post-emergent control of select broadleaf and grassy weeds, as well as nut sedge. It can be used in warm season turf and ornamentals. It's applied as a directed spray over the top of a wide range of landscape plants, and it provides post-emergent weed control with limited soil activity, so the half-life of 4 days. And then we have organic or natural options that we could choose. So EcoSmart, Monterey, St. Gabriel's Organics, they have their versions of organic products that consists of oils, fatty acids, various types of mostly burned down products for weed control. And then we have mechanical means of weed control, such as the Weed Dragon torch. Many of you have probably seen this type of apparatus in the past or have used one. This unit is good for controlling weeds, just as the pictures show, in more of a driveway setting or along a fence row, but not very practical for large areas. And then we've got units such as this that are excellent for large areas and gives us the mechanical control by showing that it has their 3 different mowers on the back of that unit. And they simply drive down between the rows and mow those weeds down with this large piece of equipment. So I think that we'll continue to see more mechanical means of weed control in the future. So that wraps up our session for today on controlling weeds in greenhouse and nursery settings. We appreciate your time, we appreciate your support of Nufarm, and we're here to help in any way. So if you have any questions or anything we can assist you with, please don't hesitate to let us know. Thank you.